Hannah, good morning. Welcome. Always good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for your wonderful article in our spring issue of Legacy, Transformation, and Action. When teachers tell their stories, change happens. And I mean, the title itself was just wonderful. And then we get into the article, and it's like, bam, Hannah is such a gift. She's an educator, she's a writer. She speaks to us from a place that a lot of us can't. And because you express yourself from the heart so clearly, your use of words, it's not just wordsmithing, it's so heartfelt that you're just a gift. So thank you.
Thank
Um,
you.
when you started the article, I mean, you jump right in, no nonsense. I've known Hannah for years, so I wouldn't expect any different from Hannah. You just said, you're walking a tightrope because it's not just instruction, it's also very complicated layers of care for each
Yeah.
student. And you said, and I'm just going to cite a few pieces because I don't want to editorialize them. There are so many what ifs in teaching, and they all seem to end up on the weights of the shoulders of teachers. It's like, oh, all of us that have taught, it's like, bam, right there. You're talking to us. It's a mistake to assume we're immune to the emotional impact of taking care of others. It's exhausting, even if it's exhilarating. And I remember that so well from your classroom when we worked together at Arlington Public Schools. And on any given day, I would walk into Hannah's classroom and so much activity, so much energy, and so much caring. I mean, you totally gave of yourself. And so you know of which you're speaking. You went on to say, one way to process, heal, and make change is to write about teaching. Our stories, vulnerable and deeply relatable, can make big changes both inside and out there in the world. So I'm making the case for how wonderfully you write. Can you talk a little about that? And in full disclosure, Hannah's now a college professor, so she's removed from that elementary classroom experience as I am. And yet, that's where you live. When you speak of these things, you're still there.
Yeah.
Um, what are your, even as we sit here this morning talking about it, how do you still think about that and how emotionally invested teachers are in the work they do every day?
Well, I think it's important to note that I wasn't a writer at first. I was a teacher. I was an elementary school teacher.
Yeah.
And I guess I was always a writer and didn't know it. I think we kind of all are, especially as teachers, because we're writing all
Yes.
the time, right?
Yes.
Um, but I was teaching, I was in it, I was in the thick of it with high need kids. You and I were at the school that was the equivalent of an inner city school.
Yes.
And I had kids who needed me. I was there 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And I did not know how to process all these hard things. And I was very young. I was in my 20s
Yep.
for those 8 years into my early 30s.
Yeah.
I did not know what to do with it. And it ate me up a lot. And I didn't have a good balance. And I loved them so much, but I wasn't always regulated and appropriate, and I didn't always have good boundaries. I didn't have tools, and teachers are not given tools other than how to teach literacy. We're given all these academic strategies
Yeah.
and no other real tools. And we build community where we can, like I did with you and some of our other friends, and like we
Yes.
found our people there. But I was lucky to have you all,
Yeah.
because I came in messy and stayed messy, and y'all helped me
Right.
be a little less messy and focus that passion and energy on these kids. And so I think a lot of teachers don't get that community. I was
Yeah.
just lucky. A lot of teachers, I mean, we didn't have great administrative support there. We had struggles in that first round of my life of this teacher,
Yep.
big struggles, and I didn't know how to handle them, and I didn't always handle them well. And I had you all to fall back on and cry on your shoulders, right? But again, that was luck. And I came home and didn't know what to do with that. It ate me up. When I got married, it impacted my marriage because I came
Yep.
home really struggling and dysregulated. All of
Yeah.
this is reality. I didn't know that these are traumas. Watching your kids suffer. We had really low income kids with a lot of trauma in their lives,
Yeah.
intense trauma. I was not trained as a counselor. I was not trained. I needed counseling myself anyway. So here I was all over the place and in
Yeah.
pain, watching them be in pain. Even when you have the easiest classroom in the world and these kids are not dealing with trauma, it's still really hard, right? So I
Yeah.
hear that teachers are exhausted because I get it. And I know that things are even harder every year. It's harder now than it's ever been. I know.
Yeah.
So I hate to write as if teachers are the problem. But then
Right.
I stopped teaching, had kids, and then had kids with severe disabilities, one in particular. I
Right.
had to go to bat. I had to fight with some teachers who were harming my children. So then I got the other end of it. Here I had been on one side of the IEP table, and now I was on the other side of the IEP table. I was fighting with principals. I mean, I've
Right.
always fought with principals as a teacher, and just, I get it. And I made
Yeah.
friends with the good ones, so don't worry. I'm not like
Oh yeah.
anti, but
No,
all
no.
of this was happening, right? And so then I was getting this new perspective. I had a lot of overconfidence in my understanding of the parenting experience before I became a mom, right? And then I had a lot of overconfidence at the beginning of being a mom, and then I had kids with significant needs. So I have very little confidence now in any of that stuff, but I know it's true in terms of what students need and how teachers are not always given the tools for that. And it is a painful, hard, complicated, layered world we live in. And then that being said, as I struggled with really significant issues with my oldest as they got older,
Yeah.
including a fear of losing him to suicide,
Yeah.
that trauma that I was experiencing, I was just ignoring it. It was his trauma, not mine. That's what I thought until I got a diagnosis of PTSD as a caregiver.
Yeah.
Once that happened, once I accepted that that was true, it felt selfish to
Yeah.
give my own diagnosis of that. I mean, this is the kid who's struggling. Who the heck am I, right?
Right.
Once that happened and my eyes were open to that reality, that one did not negate the other, and that I
Yeah.
had to address this one in
Yeah.
order to handle and support and love my kid the way they needed and deserved,
Right.
all of a sudden, all these doors opened in terms of my understanding. And I saw that this was happening before I even had kids. That not being able to accept and process and believe in my own experience was actually had harmed my ability to support them in those times. And I said, oh, this is new. I dove into research on this. I
Yeah.
discovered, in my second graduate degree, I started writing about this in terms of my own critical research about PTSD in caregivers, and teachers are caregivers. Absolutely, teachers are caregivers. We like to
Yeah.
say, oh, we can try to separate, but those of us who love our kids in the classroom, and I love
Yeah.
my college kids the same way. I mean, they are my
Yeah.
babies, even though they're
Yeah.
18 to 24 years old. Like,
Yep.
they come in and need me in so many ways that are similar to the way
Yeah.
my fifth graders and second graders did. Like, you wouldn't
Yeah.
believe it. Or maybe you
Yeah.
would. You probably would. College it's not even different.
Yeah.
They still need a mama half the
Yeah.
time. And you're like, I hear these teachers who are like, I know how to separate, and good for you, but I'm not that kind of person. I am deeply connected to my students and want to give them everything they need to be successful,
Yeah.
no matter who they are or where they come from.
Yeah.
All of them. And they all need different things, right? And that's exhausting and draining, and we just do our best. But as
Right.
I dove into that research and discovered that expressive writing, in fact, which is what I was doing at this point as a writer and as an English professor,
Yeah.
as an editor, as a book coach, I was doing all this writing, and I was starting to, I was making the connections. In person, I was discovering in my life that writing, telling stories, essays and fiction, but I had started with essays in particular,
Yeah.
about educational experiences, about parenting experiences. Like, it was not so much cathartic as deeply connecting to others. I was connecting to other parents, I was connecting to other teachers, and I was connecting to to people who as kids had these issues and were now adults and were feeling seen. I was really trying to do all of that, elevating the experience, making sure it wasn't a vent session, but in fact a meaningful um, way of showing change and growth and learning. And
Yeah.
so as I was looking into this research, I was like, this makes so much sense. And I think that other caregivers need to know this. So I focused initially on caregivers, on parents, people who are taking care of aging parents is another one. Like, you have a mother or father with not autism, with Alzheimer's, or maybe a
Yes.
sibling who's on the spectrum, all these different things, right? But I see a
Yeah.
lot of us at my age who have aging parents with dementia, and that is very, PTSD inducing, because it's this like ongoing care you have to give, in this nebulous grief
Yes.
of they're not gone, but they're leaving, and it takes so
Yeah.
much time and it's very exhausting. And then I was like, all of this is the same. It's the same part of our brain and heart, is when we're
Yeah.
in the classroom and we have a kid dealing with stuff. A kid who has spent years perhaps not being supported and they come in not believing themselves. You know that happened when I taught fifth grade. I would get some
Yeah.
kids who had never thought of themselves as learners, who thought they were not smart, and in fact, who had significant needs that when addressed, they blossomed. That
Yes.
happens to me in my freshman classroom all the time. They come in and they've been told they're not smart. It's one of my biggest beliefs in terms of why kids use AI. Not that they're lazy, not that they want to cheat, but that it makes them feel like it's leveled the playing field and they're smart and they have something to say. And so my job is to say, you had something to say well before AI. Let's get you on the page. You
Yeah.
don't get this healing using AI. You get this healing with pencil and paper or typing yourself on the computer and having something to say. And that is why it's so important to me that teachers have an outlet. Nobody listens to teachers. Everyone has thoughts on teaching and they've never been in the classroom. Every politician, every parent knows everything, right? Except for that little bit of time during COVID when all of a sudden everybody was being appreciated a lot. And then that left again quickly after that,
It did.
right?
It did.
Teachers need support. Teachers need training. Teachers need, all this stuff. They also need to be heard. And those stories, where do we put them out there? Like,
Yeah.
even as a writer, nobody wanted to hear teacher and professor stories. That's why I started a literary journal just for teachers.
Yeah.
I was like, and then we were flooded. So many teachers were like, I got a poem, I got a story, I got an essay. Thank goodness we've got this. The
Yeah.
need is there, but you don't have to be a writer to tell your story. And that's the most important thing, is that people understand you don't have to have gotten an MFA to do this. You just need to tell your story.
Right.
And people need to hear it, because once they do, it changes everything. So send op-eds out, send essays to the Huffington Post. Here's my experience as a teacher. Write for the newsletter, write a personal story for your school newsletter.
Yeah.
In my classroom, this was happening and this is what I learned. Parents will go, oh my gosh, I did not know. And it's just like this ripple effect of understanding and community building that can start with you as a teacher. All right, this is me. I
Yeah.
could talk all day. I give a whole
This is
lecture. I'm
wonderful.
so sorry. I
No,
hope
no,
that answers
no.
your question.
More. Yes. That's fabulous. And the PTSD piece, when I'm going to speak for our audience, when most of us hear PTSD, we're thinking about what's in our head. But what you share in the article, the Pennybaker research, was that, especially in his follow-up studies, there was improved health benefits across the board from this confessional
Across the
style
board.
writing. Yeah.
The
So,
research started actually with physical health. That's what they
huh.
were looking at. They were saying if students, if people in general, and they did it on student campus, if they did this, would their physical health improve? They didn't actually look at anything else. They just wanted to see, that was his interest. Is there a connection between this type of work and physical health? And what they did discover was that students who, and this was not even a long research study, it was something like 4 times that they came and wrote, or something like, it was the initial study, which was quite promising, and the results was just like a very like unfiltered, here, answer this question about this traumatic experience in your life, just write about it, and nobody else would see it, and they didn't have to share it, and they didn't try to make it good writing, they just got this experience out.
Yeah.
There's a lot of trauma on college campuses, particularly
Yeah.
for young women, and
Yeah.
that has often, that's its own thing, has not been addressed, still not addressed for a lot of students. And I see a lot of what's happening with mental illness on campus. It's pretty
Oh,
intense,
yeah.
right? So there are
Yeah.
these events they wrote about, and then what they found long term over that year is that those students who did that ended up at the student health centers way less often, more than 50% less often,
Yeah.
for colds, for injuries, for stomach aches, right? For alcohol poisoning, all these things that you end up in the student health center for. So they
Right.
said, oh my gosh, and they did a bunch of studies, and they found that to be true for people of a variety of ages.
Yeah.
That telling the story, even just saying it out loud, they discovered, but writing is a way to do it in a way that feels safe. So you don't, especially if you're promised no one's going to read it, right? So you do
Right.
that and you say it, and then they started looking into what it meant to share with others, and they really, to make sure they read it. And it was the same. It was like there was this connection and healing and overall physical wellness. And so then they started saying, okay, let's go into a more significant area of mental health with it. with people with severe PTSD. And the research overwhelmingly showed over decades
Yeah.
that expressive writing is more effective than medicine and then therapy. And when combined with medicine and therapy,
Yeah.
it was just this beautiful healing experience. And I
Amazing.
have friends here in the area in DC who run a group called CBA, Community Building Artworks, and
Yeah.
they use expressive writing specifically with veterans who come back to like Walter Reed. And we're talking
Yeah.
like missing limbs, horrible PTSD, lots of
Right.
stuff. And they started as a poetry collective, a volunteer thing. They became this large group where
Mhm.
they were writing poems in Walter Reed. You know, they were working on, and then they moved on to essays and short stories. And some of these soldiers, they became writing professors. Like they
Wow.
literally were publishing books and going on
Yeah.
book tours and
Yeah.
becoming writing teachers themselves.
Yeah.
It was profound. And that was, I knew them and didn't know this research yet. So it's all, for me, it's all coming full circle. And I'm saying, okay, we know with, we know with veterans, we know with college students, what would happen if we addressed, and this is a big what would happen type scenario, we haven't yet,
Mhm.
if we
Mhm.
looked at teachers as
Yeah.
people who are on the front lines of trauma.
Yeah.
Every year we got 25, 30 more new students,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
High school, you got a whole day's worth of hundreds, right?
Yeah.
And we are observing some kids who are fine, who just need care, just need care. All they need is
Right.
a little bit
Right.
of care. And we educate them and we listen to them and we love them, right? And then
Right.
kids who really need a lot of care,
Yeah.
who need very specific care, who need to be directed toward services,
Right.
who have been through stuff, but we don't know how to help them because we are not psychiatrists, we are not
Right.
psychologists, we are not
No.
doctors, we are not their
No.
mom, right?
Right.
This is a lot. And we are paid so little and get so little support and training, right?
Yep.
So what can we do? There are all these fights we could fight for more training, more money, more recognition. What
Yeah.
we can do for ourselves is a little bit of healing through the writing process. And that also can build community and lead to recognition raises as people become more aware of our situations and our stories and what it's really like in there, because no one knows. They have all these ideas and they have no idea what it's like in the
Yeah.
classroom.
No.
In my experiences on both sides of that IEP table,
Mhm.
I've been the one mad at teachers and I've the one been yelled at by parents, and in
Yep.
both cases for principals too. And it's just like, where can we go? What can I tangibly do right now?
Right.
I
Right.
can I can tell my story. I can write about it and I can
Yes.
share it.
Yeah. And the idea that you made such a great case for it helps you connect both internally to what your truth is, but then externally finding a community of support. And so as a writer, in the article, you bring us to that place of, okay, so you're writing to an audience. So you kind of need to do some self-checking about, is this really my story, or am I just relating the
Yes.
story of my students? And am I
That's a
doing it
tough
in a,
one.
it is because we're so connected to it.
And we
Talk
have
more
to be
about that.
careful with privacy. We have to
Yeah.
really look. I do that as a person who writes about parenting. Is
Yeah.
this my story?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in our lives is a supporting actor, right? Of the movie of us, right? So
Yeah.
people will come up in our writing and our storytelling.
Yeah.
Question is, how do we do it? And that's why in the article I was said, okay, first of all, we only talk about our own lived experiences.
Yeah.
And that's a critical aspect of all writing, and
Yeah.
in my opinion, all public speaking, that a lot of people don't understand. You see
Yes.
this in parenting essays a lot, where people cross the line.
Yeah.
They're saying, it's really important when you're writing about your students, for example, that you would never use photos without their permission.
Yep.
You would never use names. You would never use identifying characteristics. They have to
Yep.
stay ungoogleable and they have to stay
Yep.
safe. And you have
Yep.
to stay legally not liable of being sued. It's critical. That's why when we have public facing stuff, we
Yeah.
go through we go through administration and make sure everything's okay. I had a
Sure.
situation where one of my teacher writers at my literary journal wrote a beautiful essay about what it was like to have a student who had a very different political and social beliefs than her,
Yeah.
and some things he said to students in her classroom of a group he did not like.
Yeah.
It was a very hard situation for her emotionally. She wrote a creative writing piece, not an op-ed in a newspaper, but
Yep.
a literary essay about how painful that was as
Yeah.
she navigated what it was like of supporting all her students.
Yep.
You don't have to like someone's beliefs, but you still support them, and how
Right.
you navigate it and handle it in a way, that is fair and good and remains inclusive. It is so complicated when you have a political or social belief that is so very different than your
Yes.
students, and you watch them act in a way that you think is hateful.
Right.
But the rules at your school are that you have to be very careful with how you address it. We're all navigating this right now, all
Yep.
of us
Oh
in
yeah.
this world. It is unfair and terrible, the weight on teachers' shoulders, no matter our
Yeah.
beliefs, right? It's a lot. And so she did that, and then we got found by a couple of Facebook
Ooh.
groups, and it became a
Ooh.
pile-on on this. This woman has been teaching English for 33 years. This is
Yeah.
her last year. She's retiring. She is 5'1". She is this tiny mountain of amazingness.
Yeah.
She has loved on and educated, for decades. And thank goodness she shared. I had worked with her, and we even switched it to a short story versus essay. We really
Mhm.
did the work. And then
Yep.
she talked to her administration, and they had her back, thank goodness. And it died down eventually, but
Yeah.
it was horrible for a few weeks there, and
Yeah.
which is the reason I stopped writing freelance essays, because of this,
Right. Right.
and it was so unfair and terrible. And so that's the reality, that we have to be careful with what we put out there and how, because
Yes.
this is how they will take it. I mean, it was talked about on national news, and it was a beautiful little piece.
Yeah.
And she was loving toward that kid.
Right.
She had that. It didn't matter. They didn't even read the whole piece, right?
Right. Right.
So this is what the kind of environment we're in now. But the need to tell stories is greater than ever. But we need administration support and
Yeah.
recognition of the need to do that, of having an outlet. Yes, we're careful and thoughtful. We cannot write stuff and not expect there to be a response, right? So
Right.
she was careful and thoughtful, and so she got through it, and it was okay. It was still hard, but it was okay. If I were to write something where I attacked that child for a different belief,
Oh yeah.
you would be fired,
Right.
right? And on a more like emotional setting up for me, as a cis white woman, it
Mhm.
is not my place to write stories, even though I predominantly teach not white students.
Right.
I have to be really careful and thoughtful about how I write about them.
Yeah.
I have a kid with significant disabilities. I have to be careful how I write about disabilities, because I don't have those disabilities. I have my own stuff, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
we all have to do that work. We have to be thoughtful, and we have to write our stories.
Right.
My story as a person who is teaching students with these challenges. Her story was, she is this woman with these beliefs, and here's a student with a different belief, and she has to learn a lesson about this life. And that's her lesson.
Yeah.
This kid was in her piece, but this wasn't her kid. It wasn't a piece that was about her kid, and it wasn't his story. And so she and I worked hard. I was her editor,
Yeah.
making sure that happened, because the first draft is going to be like, always,
Right.
always,
Right.
right?
Of
But
course.
that's why we edit. That's why we
Yes.
work on it. And that's why we become better and better. And so she really found that. It wasn't
Yes.
about her kids who were being treated hatefully. It wasn't about the kid who had obviously been taught to treat people hatefully.
Yes.
She was writing about her experience as a teacher in a complicated classroom. That was the story. She didn't vilify the kid,
Right.
even though she really hated the behavior.
Right.
Didn't vilify the kid, because
Yeah.
that wasn't going to work. That's not how
Yes.
you tell a story. Maybe in
No.
the first draft, but not in the published draft, right?
Right.
She told her story, and she was the main character, and these other actors played a role, and she learned a lesson, and that was the intent. Who was the audience? What was her intent? And our
Mhm.
intent as writers is never to vent.
No.
Our intent as writer is never to vilify somebody.
No.
Okay, you can write an op-ed if you punch up, and you can vilify up, right? I might have thoughts about somebody who's in charge of the entire Department of Education and
Right.
damage they're doing, but that's not gonna, it doesn't hurt me to say I have a problem with this person and the job they're doing above me. That's a whole different
Right.
story. But
Right.
a kid, it would be punching down, right?
Yeah.
Somebody whose life experience I can't understand, that's not appropriate. I just want to say that it's just like when you see satire, you're allowed to make fun of the president, whoever the
Yes.
president may be, right?
Right.
Because it doesn't harm them. They have all the power. You can punch up if you need to. And even the
Right.
phrase punch up, you're not really punching.
No.
You're just, if you're making reference to or speaking about your opinions, it's
Right.
easier if you're criticizing or critiquing somebody who has all the power, right?
Yep.
But a kid has no power, and so we are
No.
thoughtful and careful. They're vulnerable, all of them, no matter how they're acting and where they come from. They're
Yes.
vulnerable, and we are thoughtful and generous and gentle,
There you
even
go.
as our experiences are hard and we talk about them.
Yeah. So as a final word of wisdom, the notion of actual name versus pen name when you're doing this writing and it is personal, do you have any thoughts, any guidance in general to teachers when you're going,
I
you know,
do have lots of thoughts.
please,
I did not
please,
know when I started what it would be like to write in the freelance world, because I started as a freelance essayist in newspapers and magazines,
right?
and I was eager for bylines. It was very new to me.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't know that there would be fallout. And so I definitely would have changed, at least been H. Grieco instead of
Okay.
Hannah Grieco, right?
Okay.
And I certainly wouldn't have said, I live in this town.
Right.
I don't say that anymore. I just
Yeah.
say Washington, D.C. now. And they don't know, nobody knows what that means, because people will find you, they will dox you. It's pretty bad.
Yes.
It's really unfortunate and terrible, honestly.
Yes.
And I probably would have changed my name completely, but I will say that it is fine to use a pen name in the literary world and not usually fine to use a pen name in national publications. So you have to
Okay.
think about that. The reality is that the Washington Post is not going to let you use a pen name. The New York Times is
Right.
not going to let you use a pen name. If you are writing for verticals like that, op-ed pieces, it's rare. It's not impossible, but it's rare they'll let you be anonymous without you
Right.
use a pen name. They want a real person.
Yep.
So like when I'm writing an op-ed now, they say Hannah Grieco, professor at blah, blah, blah university, who lives in the Washington, D.C. area. Like they want to, because people need to know that you are a
Yeah.
verifiable source. This is what I teach my comp students, right? You need to know who the source is. And you
Right.
can't be a verifiable source if your name isn't your name.
Right.
So that's a balance situation. Now in
Yes.
creative writing, you're writing poetry or novels, you don't need to
Yeah.
be a verifiable source.
Yeah.
You can be John Smith, go for it, right?
Right.
And again, I kind of wish it's too late now. I got books out, but like I wish, right?
Right.
So that's the thing. You think about that and you decide, what writing am I doing for myself? It still has value. It's
Yep.
still cathartic. It
Yes.
still helps you heal if there's a trauma,
Yes.
writing it
Yes.
down. Or what could I do? Maybe I'll talk about it on a podcast. Maybe I'll talk
Mhm.
about, I one time, the very beginning, the start of my writing was I did a group called Listen to Your Mother. It was a one night event.
Yeah.
There was hundreds and hundreds of people in the audience, but it was
Yep.
one time. And I shared a story. It was very similar to Moth, if you know that kind of storytelling.
Yep.
It was
Yep.
like that. It got me writing because people came up afterwards and were like, tell me about this, tell me about this, tell me. It was about my kid and a
Yeah.
very tough hospital stay. And
Yeah.
everyone was like, no one talks about this. I was like,
Yes.
I need to talk about this, don't I? I
Yeah.
wish somebody had talked about this before I experienced it so I didn't feel so alone. That's what started all of this.
Yes.
And so teachers say, okay, is this something I'm writing for myself because this experience with this kid has hurt me and for days I haven't been able to let it go?
Right.
Or is this something I write and I say, other teachers need to read this? And so I'm writing to teachers, or my principal needs to read this. Administrators need to know what this is like. That's my audience. Or parents need to know what this is like. That's my audience. Or politicians need to know what this is like. Every one of those is a different piece.
Yes.
All of us who've taught English know this, because when we talk about persuasive essays, who are we persuading, right? That's
Right.
where my comp classes get going, right? Is who is my audience? What is my intention with this writing? And it's the same for us with expressive writing. It's the exact same. So we think that way.
Well, Hannah, thank you so much. The piece is incredible. We're going to take this recording of the author interview, put it right on the cover of the piece so that people not only get the benefit of your writing, but then get this personal connection with you and hear the passion and the compelling vision you have for this for educators. Here's hoping this takes root and there's more of this for teachers moving forward. And if there is research to be done, that it gets done.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. It's important stuff. Plus, I just like to hear teachers' stories. We all have so many connections, so many shared experiences, so many interesting ways of looking at those experiences and learning from each other. I mean, what a gift we can give each other to share and listen, you know? I mean, this community, we could really be supporting each other and getting through hard things. I think we're going to need that now more than ever. And so I would love to be a part of that, and I would love to read
Yes.
everyone's pieces
Yes. Yes.
and help elevate them so other people can read them too. So I hope you all will write. I hope.